It was the fall of the year 2000, after the dot-com bust, when the founder and CEO of Interrelate walked into an all-employee company-wide meeting with what felt like the weight of the world on his shoulders. Now, some of the employees thought he was there to announce the company's IPO, but instead he was there to announce the layoff of 75 of them, 22% of the 335 employees scattered across the globe. These were hardworking, faithful employees, most of whom he had personally recruited, all of whom had invested some of their personal savings in the company. As he sat there with a churning stomach waiting for the meeting to be called to order, there were many other worries vying for his attention that morning. He had a company desperate for more capital, but a lead investor that had become disenchanted and had just said no to any more funding. He had a company on fumes burning millions of dollars a month, and he could only make payroll by not paying long overdue invoices from angry vendors. He had impatient customers demanding better service from an unstable technology solution. He had the very real possibility of shutting down his very public company, the public profile he had built. He had the very real possibility of declaring personal bankruptcy because of all the personal guarantees he had made on behalf of the company, including real estate leases all across the world. And entrepreneurs like the CEO of Interrelate are not alone in this new normal economy. There are many pressures and many stresses on all of us as we face sagging demand and uncertainty. And it's a very difficult world, and we need to grab on to every bit of wisdom and knowledge and best practice to pour into our companies, to turn our companies around, to turn this economy around. And over the years, as I've read thousands of business cases, and as I've read thousands of business plans and thousands of business profiles, and as I've looked at all the experiences I've had as an entrepreneur and all the businesses that I've started and invested in, I'm trying to get my slides to go the right direction, and I've developed hundreds of principles that can be applied to improve a business. And we're going to look at 3 of these principles today to diagnose the problems and issues that Interrelate faced. One is the concept risk, one is the cash cycle, and one is scalability. So when Interrelate first launched, they were one of the very first companies of their kind in 1999. They were what was known as an application service provider, and this was a very new concept. So I define concept risk as the clearer your value proposition is to your target customers in your target market, the lower the concept risk. If you lack clarity, if there's confusion with what you're doing, if you're too new and too different, then the higher the concept risk. So when they launched in 1999 as an application service provider, it was a brand new concept. Now, today in 2012, it's known as software as a service. It's a much more common value proposition. But when they launched, they had 4 key aspects to their concept risk. Number 1, it was a new offering. They combined software, analytics, third-party data, and consulting in a brand new way that had never been done before. Number 2, their new service delivery model was somewhat confusing. Customers were used to installing software on their servers in their data centers. So along comes Interrelate and says, no, we're gonna stream this to you from some remote data center along with your sensitive customer data across a fairly unsecure and unreliable internet in 1999. That raised a lot of doubts. Number 3, they had a new pricing paradigm. Customers were used to purchasing a license and owning their software. In this case, they were saying, no, you're going to rent that software on a monthly basis. And it raised doubts. Will I ever own it? Will I overpay eventually? What about control? Will I be held hostage, etc.? And they had no relationships. They were a brand new startup, hiring brand new salespeople, try to create brand new relationships with global 2,000 companies, the largest 2,000 companies in the world. That was very difficult. But they did successfully sell to 35 global 2,000 companies in their first 2 years. But once the dot-com market went bust, suddenly that concept risk looked a lot riskier to a much more cautious customer set. All right, so let's contrast that to Groupon. When Groupon launched with their new idea for marketing, they were actually leveraging two really well-known concepts. One was money-saving coupons, and one was social media. And so they just combined that for kind of a group couponing or Groupon. Even their name helped explain their value proposition. But still, it was a new offering, so they did have some concept risk. But they mitigated that by rolling out all kinds of fun and entertaining and informative videos on their website to help explain their concept risk. So in terms of minimizing concept risk in your businesses, number one, your offering. You want it to be differentiated. Yes, that's true, but it cannot be so new and so different that your customers don't get it. Number two, your delivery method must engender trust and not confusion or doubt. Number three, your pricing always has to be easy to understand and easy to implement to avoid endless confusion or negotiation. And number three, try, if at all possible, to leverage existing relationships rather than trying to create new relationships with new customers through a new sales force. Let's go into cash cycle. This is another issue that Interrelate wrestled with. And I define cash cycle as a time that's elapsed between when you start experiencing costs of serving a customer and when you eventually collect from that customer. And the shorter that time is, the more you match up inflows and outflows, the more efficient your cash cycle. And the more you can grow your company without the need for external financing like Interrelate required. Let's look at Interrelate's cash cycle. It was a very inefficient cash cycle. They had to spend almost a full year with a 6 or 7 person team of strategy consultants and analytic consultants, et cetera, to build the solution, a highly customized solution for a customer. For an entire year, they were burning up cash before they got the solution live. Now, once the solution went live, then they started charging the monthly fee for 3 years. Now, this consumed an enormous amount of cash for one project, but they were selling a new Global 2000 customer every couple of weeks. So imagine the amount of cash they were burning up in this process. Now, they're not the only ones with an inefficient cash cycle. Think of a spec home builder or an automaker that has to pour in a lot of labor and a lot of inputs into their product months or even a year ahead of selling it. They have the same problem. And it's no secret that in almost every single downturn, major spec home builders and automakers go bankrupt because as those cash cycles lengthen, they can't make their debt payments. Now let's take a look at D.R. Horton. This is one of the largest publicly held spec home builders in the U.S. Now this is their last 12 months performance, real data as of June of this year. So look what happened in the previous 12 months. Yes, they made net income of several $100 million, but they consumed cash. They generate no cash. And notice the staggering debt levels. By contrast, let's look at an e-commerce business model. In this case, Amazon.com. Real data, same time period, half of the net income of D.R. Horton, but look at the cash they generate. They have a very efficient cash cycle, and note that there's no debt. So what is it about an e-commerce, or specifically Amazon's cash cycle, that makes it so efficient? Well, the first thing they do when you order a book from Amazon is they clip your credit card and they get the money. Then and only then do they experience the costs associated with fulfilling that order. And in many cases, they've negotiated not to pay UPS, et cetera, for 45 days. That's a very efficient cash cycle. As they grew, they just continued to accumulate more and more cash. Okay, so let's look at improving our cash cycle as entrepreneurs. The main thing is to match up those inflows and outflows as much as possible. We can do this in a couple of ways. One is to change your business model, if at all possible. Let's go back to a spec home builder. We've talked about the issues that they face. Now let's think about a custom home builder. A custom home builder, first of all, never moves a muscle until they sell the home. Then they almost always demand some kind of down payment up front, typically 25%, and typically monthly progress payments as the home is being built. Same capability, same industry, completely different business models, completely different cash cycle implications. A custom home builder being far superior to a spec home builder. All right, if you can't change your business model, at least try to get as much upfront customer deposit as you can to help fund your working capital requirements. And number 3, try to move up your billing cycle if you're a services company. Let's say you have a pool service cleaning company. You should, and let's say you're servicing pools for the month of June. Bill the customer for the month of June on the 1st of June so they pay you during the month of June. Don't wait till the end of June to bill them because then you won't get their cash until into July. You can't grow that kind of business model effectively. Okay, and failing everything else, try your best to negotiate extended vendor payments like Amazon.com does. Now, don't do what Interrelate did and just, slow pay. Do it fairly, but negotiate extended payments, again, with the mind to match up inflows and outflows. Okay, another issue that Interrelate faced was scalability. And scalability I define as the relationship between your revenue growth and your cost growth. Let me illustrate this. The green bars represent revenue growth. The red line represents cost of goods sold as a % of revenue. In this case, high scalability, which is what you want in your business models, says that as you grow your company, your cost per each, if you will, comes down. You have economies of scale working on your side. This is the ideal business that you want to have. Let's look at Interrelate for a second. First of all, no scalability benefit. So remember, they had to hire an entire project team to highly customize this solution for every customer. Their unit economic model was customer by customer. Every couple of weeks as they sold a new Global 2000 customer, they had to hire a whole new team, etc. There was no scalability benefit. Their costs rose at the same rate as their revenue. Now, in some cases, you even see diseconomies of scale. Now, most complex services business models are not scalable because you have to hire a bunch of people to do the job. Here's Casella. Actual data, real publicly held firm, last 10 years. Notice the green bar. As their revenue has increased, notice their cost line. Their cost as a percentage of revenue has actually increased. They will grow themselves right out of business. This is decidedly not scalable. This is diseconomies of scale. You do not want this kind of business model. Now let's contrast that with Commvault. Commvault is a software company, publicly held firm, real data, last 10 years, same time period. Look what's happened. First of all, very nice revenue growth. And look at their cost line. They're highly scalable. Their cost as a percentage of sales is coming down as they grow the company. Their story only gets better and better as they grow the company. They only get more profitable. Now, what's interesting about software, and even videos and music and books, they're highly, highly scalable. There's nothing more scalable. So think about this. When Microsoft comes out with Microsoft Word, they can sell that packaged licensed software to one customer or 100 million customers with no additional labor or materials input, especially if it's downloadable. A downloadable song, once you record that song, there is no more cost except for perhaps credit card processing fees. That's what's scalable. You can take a company from $1 to $1 billion with almost no effort. So it's no secret that the most profitable companies and the most valuable companies in the world have highly scalable products and services. Microsoft, Google, Apple. So we want to seek scalability. So how to improve scalability? Number one, standardize your offering. Try to sell exactly the same thing, whether it's products or services. Productize your services. Sell exactly the same thing to each customer that you can. This will improve your scalability. Number two, automate as much as possible. Invest as much as possible in software and in IT to automate away any labor content to make your business more scalable. And if you can't automate, at least implement self-service and to try to automate the customer interaction costs. I'll give you a quick example of this. I'm an investor in a company called RoboFusion. They have a really fun, interactive, unmanned, totally automatic, robotic-controlled kiosk that can deliver a frozen yogurt treat far cheaper, far better, and far more scalable than a teenager behind the counter of a brick-and-mortar yogurt store. That is a highly scalable business model. All right, so in conclusion, these three principles of concept, risk, cash cycle, and scalability, as I mentioned, are just three of hundreds of such principles that can be applied to improve your businesses. But even if we execute our businesses perfectly And in a God-honoring way, it is still up to the Lord to bless us. As Deuteronomy 8:18 says, "And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is this day." It's for God's purposes. But God may choose to sanctify us instead in our entrepreneurial endeavors. There's a famous expression which says, wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from making mistakes. And many of the principles that I've developed have come out of the crucible of calamity of my own mistakes. For you see, I know so much about Interrelate because I was that founder and CEO. I was the one that walked into that room with the weight of the world on my shoulders and an unfulfilled multi-million-dollar pledge to my church's building project based on almost worthless stock. But God, by his mercy, allowed us to raise the funding we needed, and we got the company profitable and we got it sold, but only for a fraction of the $75 million investment that had been made. It was a disappointing outcome for everyone. But God used that sanctifying experience to compel me to analyze what went wrong and to analyze all my experiences I'd ever had and all the thousands of articles and business cases and investments that I've ever made to develop these principles that can be applied to any business at any stage for the glory of God.